Hello. Thank you so
Hello.
much for tuning in to another episode of the Hen House at Home Fall Book Tour. I'm Monica Fernandez, the media manager at Red Hen Press.
And I'm Toby Harper, Deputy Director.
We are so excited for tonight's event with Melanie Conroy-Goldman and Amy Shearn. But before we get to that, we wanted to wish a very happy publication day to High Skies by Tracy Doherty, the winner of Red Hen's very first novella award. This novella recounts the collision of devastating weather, Cold War suspicion, tense race relations, and the unintended consequences of good intentions in a small West Texas town in the 1950s. Even though it's set in the 50s, it's a compelling and relevant read for today. So pick up your copy now, and we'll see Tracy on next week's event as well. So we're looking forward to that. But now for tonight's main event, which we're so excited to welcome Amy Shearn, author of Unseen City, and Melanie Conroy-Goldman, the author of The Likely World, for some spooky reading fun. I did my best to get in touch with my glam goth look. I have
I got a black shirt,
lipstick.
so
You can't really tell.
I forgot my lipstick today.
I have crystals with me. If it's still light out here in LA, but if it was darker, I would have mood lighting going on. So I'm so excited for this. But without further ado, please welcome Amy and Melanie. Hi.
Hello.
So much.
All right. So excited for this event.
Yeah. I love the look that you guys have going on. So we're just going to pass the torch. You guys can get started.
Alrighty. Yeah. I believe, Amy, are you reading first?
Yes.
All right.
I don't know. You're in charge. Yes.
All right. Cool.
The answer is yes.
Looking forward to it.
Okay. Thank you so much. So glad to be here. So I'm going to read some of Unseen City, which is, among many other things, a story about a haunted house. So I'm going to read part actually from the middle of the book, where a man named Ellis, who his parents own this house, and he spent time in it as a child. But the house, oh my gosh, look, there's a ghost. Hi, I'm busy. Love you. Okay. The house has been rental property for a long time, and Ellis has been assigned the job of going to replace a door. Okay. So the house had always been a problem. It was the inexplicable creepiness of the place, even as tidy as they kept it, that instilled a kind of fury in the neighbors. It was the unsettled feeling that descended as soon as you stepped near the house itself, particularly the first floor, particularly the room in the back, the keeping room. Ellis had Googled replacing a door hinge and studied some wobbly YouTube videos, so he had his wooden shims ready to prop up the sagging door, his cheap brass hinges because the kooky handyman online preferred them to the fancier ones. He crouched by the door, opened his bag, stirred around for the wrench and work gloves. Then, all in the same instant, he stood up again, and the door shot open, flinging forward with such a force he was knocked backwards, clutching his nose, stunned on the ground, and waiting for the blood to start pouring from his face. It didn't, but he still needed some time to recover himself. The door flapped innocently. "What the fuck?" said Ellis, his butt on the ground, his hands on his face. "Hey man, watch it. I'm working on the door here. Be careful." But no one came out of the door. The pain thudded through Ellis's head, a visceral reminder of the few times he'd been punched in the face, horsing around with the Bronx cousins, a college-era brawl in a bar. Hello? There was no one. He pushed himself up and, shaking off the stars that swarmed his vision, peered into the front hall. But no one was there. There was a pocket of ice in the air. He remembered now the weird thermodynamics of the house, how it was given to stagnant air and sudden cold drafts. The small carpeted entryway needed fresh paint and better lighting, but besides that looked relatively normal. The door to the first floor apartment stood directly to Ellis's right, closed, and, he discovered, when despite himself, he gave it a little shove, locked. He heard no sound on the creaking stairs, no footsteps overhead. Hello? Anyone home? It's Ellis Williams, Harmon's son, he said. The landlord, you know? Realizing belatedly that his entry, a big man busting in through the door, clumsy and cursing, might be disconcerting to any lingering tenants had they not already moved out as they were supposed to. Ellis muttered to himself as he stepped into the hallway. Damn worn-out hinges, rusty springs, that spooky fucking draft. He entered the house, leaving his tool bag loitering on the step and the door hanging open. The carpet in the hallway was clean but threadbare, a hypnotic hexagonal pattern he remembered studying as a child. Seeing the pattern and breathing the hallway smell reminded Ellis how, as a kid, he had raced up and down the stairs of that old Holland house as fast as he could to avoid the ghost that chased him around. He had a distinct sense memory of how it felt to have her, nipping at his heels as he ran. His mother would always shush him, maintaining it was simply a creaky old house, and to stop making a racket for the renters. He remembered liking the ghost he invented to play with, finding her not scary, but fun. As if reading his thoughts, the front door slammed shut behind him. He jumped, yelled, "Shit!" Ellis reached again for the doorknob, only the door wouldn't open. Ellis slammed his open palm against the door, ignoring the pain twinkling across his fingertips. He rattled the doorknob pointlessly. "Come on," he muttered to the door. Then he heard the door lock, the deadbolt sliding shut with ominous finality. "Hello? Someone there?" He yelled into the crack between the door and the wall. Then he remembered about the peephole and pressed his eye to it. Of course, there was no one there. He rattled the knob some more before slapping the door and turning away disgusted, stomped upstairs to pound on that apartment door. No answer. Stomped downstairs to pound on that apartment door, as if the tenants might have materialized in the past minute. Nothing. The only other door went down to the basement, and everyone knew you weren't supposed to go into the basement. But after rattling the front door some more, trying futilely to shimmy it open with his Amex, and then sharing some more of his feelings with the slab of wood, Ellis couldn't see another option. He walked through the creaky front door to the basement, through the creaky front hall to the basement door, opened it, and foolishly whispered, "Hello," down the stairs before shaking his head and commanding himself, "You are a grown-ass man, go down the damn stairs." Ducking on the steep steps so he didn't concuss himself on top of everything else, Ellis felt his breath catching in his chest. He couldn't find the switch, and thus shuffled along in the dim light afforded by the casement windows. The basement air was clammy, necrotic. There was again always that eerie feeling of being watched, that sense that someone nearby was not just watching, but in fact raging, sulking, plotting. Impossibly, he sensed he was walking into an ambush. Ellis remembered that beyond the storage crates, beyond the ancient bicycles piled like skeletons in catacombs, beyond the monstrous furnace with its menacing green eye, there was another set of rickety, termite-nibbled stairs leading up to the cellar door. He tried to move quickly toward the door, shuddering with the distinct feeling his heels were being nipped at by the grouchy old ghost. That fucking house had his mind all mixed up and spooky too. The presence he had always felt in that house, the whatever it was, swarmed toward him. He heard the basement door slam shut overhead, grunted with fear despite himself. A bluish fog of icy air enveloped him. Ellis stumbled away, heart racing, blood crashing noisily against his skull. He found the back stairs, flung himself up them, fumbled with the lock, and slammed his shoulders so hard against the cellar doors that when he heard a splintering, he imagined for a confused instant it was his bones cracking. But it was the door, which flew open, birthing Ellis up and out of the aperture like a baby born in a taxi, breathless, grunting in an inhuman rush. As he lay there panting, a delivery truck puttered down the street, its side painted with a triangle encasing an enormous eyeball, an eye that seemed to track him as the truck drove slowly on, made a clumsy U-turn at the dead end, and passed him by again. Thank you.
Ooh. All right, so that was so cool. And, Ellis goes through all that, and then he's like, should I sell this house? I don't know. Maybe I should sell this house. I think my advice to him is that he should sell the house. I'm so happy to be here tonight with you guys. I'm Melanie Conroy-Goldman, and I'm going to be reading from The Likely World, my book. I just want to encourage you guys to drop a comment in the comment section if you're here, because otherwise we don't know, and we love to hear from you. And if a question comes up as we're talking, just go ahead and drop it in there too. Hi, Judy. You did not miss me. So welcome everybody tonight. I'm going to be reading also from the middle section of my book. And the main character, the narrator, is named Melly. And after a long separation, she's reconnected with a high school friend, someone she has a kind of monster crush on that she's never confessed. And he's just come back from touring with a theater troupe, and you'll hear how that's gone. But anyway, he has jet lag, he's got culture shock, and she swoops in and rescues him from this kind of communal living situation where he is, and takes him on the subway uptown to her dorm. And I'll read from there. They're doing a play, have been touring a play across Siberia. They're the first Western theater troupe to visit that region, but this turns out to be something like being the first Western theater troupe to visit Mars. The journey as interminable, the audience, when you get there, just as lively. The tundra hadn't exactly nurtured a love of experimental arts in its people, with the result that the troupe had played to unheated concert halls in former prison colonies, 2 rows of senile women smoking cheroot and nodding off. The actors have various theories as to what went wrong: kickbacks, or an underdeveloped travel industry, or an outright scam perpetrated on Davos, their director. At last, they are home for their New York run, but they all have weird diseases from travel, have all been secretly sleeping with each other's girlfriends, and the play, they suspect, is not very good. Paul is wide-eyed and manic on the subway trip uptown, packing and repacking his Prince rounded flavors, flicking his Zippo. "You've changed," Paul says as the N train carries us uptown. "You're less, you're more." "Tell me about the play," I say. The lights in the train flicker off and on again. Paul rambles. "It's a fairy tale, Nordic, ancient, about a fortunate man who has an only daughter. This girl is so beautiful, the clan becomes convinced she's divine. They begin to leave offerings for her rather than the troll people who live in the forests surrounding their settlement. You see the trolls from the first rise of the curtain in the shadows, moving in and out of the wings, but you don't know what they are, whether set piece or character. Talking, Paul loses the thread, gets distracted. These ads for genital warts, it's some kind of entrapment. You can't help but look at them, but then because it's public, looking at them implicates you, suggests that warts are relevant to your life, that you need their help with the warts." "The play," I remind him. His neck leans, his head almost touching my shoulder. The train speeds, rickety-rack, rickety-rack, rickety-rack. "It is lonely," Paul tells me, being a rich man's daughter, being treated like a goddess. Being worshipped is different from being loved, and being beautiful can hurt like the wind hurts. When winter comes, the beautiful daughter fashions herself an ice brother. There's a song, and snow falls, an effect they manage with buckets of ivory flakes and then these soft, silent brooms. Then, inevitably, the spring. For the first time in the production, the trolls enter into the light, and the makeup, the costuming, they transform out of the shadows. They're not what we expected, the trolls. The beautiful daughter begs them. She begs and begs for them to bring her ice brother to life so the sun can't destroy him. The trolls agree, although we know, like all magical bargains, this one will turn out poorly. Paul's eyes close for a moment in the telling. "Time to transfer." I shake him gently. I notice a smell, an odor of old man, which is nonetheless his own, as if the smell of his future is already upon him. We navigate 42nd, Paul making wide arcs around the musicians and the homeless. He's nervous, like a tourist, but he doesn't stop talking. The rich man's daughter, Paul continues, keeps him secret, her ice brother. He's not a brother, maybe. That's one thing the play leaves open, the possibility that he's a lover or another self. It's summer, and they meet at twilight. And there's a song where they're happy, and it's just them, an hour just for them. But then it switches to harvest music, and everything is flushed in an orange glow, and the villagers appear carrying sheaves of wheat and buckets of red berries. The villagers dry fish over fires, and the rich man's daughter presides, taking their offerings, and the trolls, back in the shadows, gnash their teeth and complain of hunger. A hush falls, the industry of the villagers continuing in pantomime, and then it is twilight, and the ice boy appears. The train stops at 116th, and we follow the crowd of students returning from Zen Palette and Super Bob Flanagan and the Angelica toward the night, toward the fluorescent glow of West Side Market. Paul is still talking as we wander the aisles, collecting an unlikely basket of sundries, Melba toast and Doritos and creme fraiche and grape juice. The ice boy, Paul says, is more beautiful than his human sister, and he enthralls the villagers, enraptures them. Their wheat rots, their berries ferment, their drying fish burns. The harvest is abandoned, and the village is going to starve. The girl looks on at what she's wrought as the brooms and buckets of soap flakes emerge and winter approaches. They'll have neither wood nor meat. Not wood, not meat, sings the fortunate daughter. The villagers begin to freeze in attitudes of prostration around the boy, bowing and stilled with wonder. The trolls beckon the girl. You can fix this. There's another deal, of course. Cut off the ice brother's nose and plant it, and enough food will grow for the winter. She has no choice. She takes a glistening, sharp blade and swipes at her own brother. He bends, cradling his wounded self, and remains on the still and darkened stage as the villagers stir and awaken. After the audience is sure the play has ended, even beginning hesitant applause, the boy at last reveals what is left of him. He's hideous, hideous, so hideous that even his sister can't bear to look at him. In the final scene, the ice boy takes refuge among the trolls, and as the curtain falls, sings a broken song about losing love when you lose your beauty. Paul is the ice boy. As Paul and I take our place in line, the checker smiles at him. He's still on the thin side, but his 20s have begun to sculpt his face into something angular and arresting. Even now, with the yellow of travel and illness beneath the surface, with sleeplessness visible below his eyes, lady checkers and boys in tight pants buying condoms behind us, and the fashionable downtown women smile at him. He wasn't Boston beautiful, but this is New York, and beauty has a richer palette in this town. I can't look at him. I can't help looking at him. And that's it. Okay, folks.
Hey, that was so great, Melanie.
Thank you.
So much.
So, what do you think, Amy? Shall I read a little tarot?
I think that you should. I think it's time.
All right.
Time to summon the spirits.
So, hey, Ann Vandermeer's here, and Eleanor Henderson, and my husband. So nice to see you all. So, Amy and I had this idea. We think it's really going to catch on. It's using tarot cards as a mode of literary criticism. So, I'm going to do a tarot reading, not for Amy, but for Amy's book. So this is a tarot reading for Unseen. I'm going to do a simplified tarot. Of course, I know probably most of you went through a middle school goth phase, so you know a lot about tarot. That's where I got most of my knowledge, burning incense,
Same.
listening to the Smiths.
Right.
So I'm going to do a simplified reading here, and I'm going to use the cards to inspire me to ask some questions, and we'll see where it goes. What do you think, Amy?
I think it's the best idea I've ever heard.
Okay, cool. Here I am, totally shuffling the cards.
Okay, and my book is supposed to concentrate, right? Is that how?
So like concentrate on your book. And, yeah, and I'm concentrating on your book too, right? And I'm going to draw a past card, a present card, and a future card. And again, these aren't about what's going to happen to your book, and it's not about what's going to happen to you. It's a way of reading your book itself. All right, so the past card, don't be scared.
I'm not.
It's going to be good. I feel like it's really good. So the past card in tarot isn't the past in general. It's the aspects of the past that are exerting influence on the present. And when Amy and I talked about this idea, what we thought was that we would think of the past, the fictional past, as being the backstory and the deep backstory. The fictional present as being the main narrative arc of the text, and the future being kind of the imaginative space where the reader can project out and imagine what might have become of the characters and how they might live beyond Amy's story. Okay.
Can you guys tell Melanie's a professor? She's so smart. Okay, go ahead.
That's what we do in professing is
professory.
We lay tarot cards and then we do readings for our students.
I thought so. Yeah.
How you get tenure. Okay, cool. Check this out. This is Amy's past card. I know you guys all recognize it because you're all tarot aficionados. But this card is the Six of Cups. And you'll see it's two children, kind of a garden scene. And in the background, there's the kids are putting flowers into cups. So I think of this card as like kind of twofold. The first way I think of it is kind of as Eden, the ideal but lost past, right? We've been cast out of Eden. And then the second way I think of it is kind of as the nostalgia card. So backstory, deep backstory in fiction can function as like the origin myth for a superhero. It can be what drives the character. But if their relationship to that is more like nostalgia, then it can be the thing that holds them back, which I think could be true of Meg. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Meg, the main character of this book, has she's very defined by her past. She has a sister who died 10 years before the book starts, and that is indeed her sort of origin myth. It's like kind of how she defines herself as somebody who's in mourning, who always has this loss as part of her life, and she uses it as an excuse in many ways. She uses it as an excuse to create distance between her and other people. She doesn't really trust anyone. She doesn't. She says several times throughout the book that she doesn't believe in love. That she would never only fool would fall in love, something like that.
I love that part where she says that control is her superpower. That's
right.
Like,
yeah.
that's the worst superpower.
Yeah.
Not like sexiness to be your superpower or like karate.
That's right. Yeah. She's controlling a lot of impulses until she's not anymore. Yeah. But I think that part of why this is so sort of narratively useful too is because she her kind of relationship with the other realm and with the dead makes her very open to stories about the other realm. And so when this man Ellis, who I read a part from the book where he's in his haunted house, and when he comes to her and needs help researching his haunted house, she is like kind of already a little bit there. She's like used to talking to the dead. She's used to thinking about the dead and like giving them a voice.
I love that. I love that point you made, that like thinking about sort of nostalgia or being invested in the past the way I phrased it was more like it was a negative, but how you talk about it is that, like any imaginative space, it also contains possibility and
Yeah.
an avenue to openness.
Right. And it's also, but I like the way you talk about nostalgia too, because to her, there's a scene where she has gotten a very nostalgic view of her sister. Her sister was beautiful and perfect and would have had the best life ever. And everything would be fine if her sister was still alive. And then there's a scene with her brother. They also have a brother where he's sort of like, do you even remember what she was really like? You're not remembering all sorts of things. You're not remembering any of the bad things, which I think is an interesting thing that happens when somebody dies. You feel like you can only remember the good things or only talk about the good things. You have to sort of, do like a hagiography kind of situation.
So can I ask you about that Eden thing that I mentioned before? So now that I'm thinking about it, I sort of think that there is an Eden, a lost paradise in your text. And that has to do with the other backstory. There's a whole narrative. Am I spoiling something if I say it's a ghost's narrative?
No, I don't think so. I think that's clear.
So there's a whole ghost narrative that takes place in the 19th century in New York City in a kind of paradise, but there's dark stuff too. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. It's right, the sort of historical narrative of the book, which is the ghost story from when she was alive. It takes place in Weeksville, which was this sort of utopian rural community in what is now Brooklyn, but then it was all farms of free landowning African Americans before the Civil War. It is this sort of utopian activist, beautiful farming community. And in a way, it's sort of like, I like the way you put it, like the lost promise. It's sort of like what America could have been and then chose not to be, and instead sort of as we've continued to see the forces of racism and oppression and gentrification and land grabbing and all sorts of other forces have taken over. But I'm really interested in, throughout the East Coast, there were all of these sort of lost communities that, and throughout what is now New York, little lost urban rural communities that were their own little towns and then just kind of got subsumed and forgotten. And it's like, I feel like there's like an alternate reality where that's what really took off and got a chance to really thrive.
I love when you're talking about the riots, which are taking place simultaneous with this more idyllic space in the rural community of Weeksville. People keep saying they're over, and then someone else will say, or the text will intervene by saying they're never really over, right? So that kind of dark force of racism, even when the incident ends, persists, which I thought was a great way of representing that kind of legacy.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think it's so weird that the book is coming out this right now when, the events of the summer were so intense, the conversation of, the sort of unresolved grief our country has about this trauma of racism has all bubbled up to the surface this summer, as it does from time to time, as it did in 1863 in the book. And throughout time, especially in New York City, where everyone's kind of just jammed together and everything like erupts volcanically every once in a while. Yeah.
Well, I noticed that you've segued us into the present. So I think it's time for us to pull the present card. So this is the card that we think of as we, in this huge practice that many people do of reading tarot for books, we practitioners, very small art. Think of this as covering the main narrative arc, the front story of the piece. And as you guys have already heard, that story focuses on Meg. But there's also Ellis, and there's also a narrative of gentrification that has to do with the way New York City is changing. So let's see what we have in that place. So here we have the Queen of Swords. And the Queen of Swords, kind of like, if you just look at the card, she looks like cool and awesome and powerful because she's a lady with a sword and a throne.
That's right.
But that's not what she means. She's the widow card. So she's the card that kind of represents the female mourning. So the way that that women might mourn that would be different from men, and that kind of loss. And one of the things I think is interesting about the way that this card represents female mourning is as embarrassment, which I think is not general, but I think in the case of your book, I feel like there is a kind of like closed offness, or maybe Meg doesn't want to show her weakness. And we talked about with the last card that she's kind of pulled into the past. So just from a perspective of craft, how do you take a character who's stuck and push them into a plot, get them moving in a way that's going to be able to drive a narrative? And how did you do that with Meg?
Yeah, good question. Did I? Well, I think, I had all of these, I was working on this book for a really long time, and there's obviously all these separate storylines that I sort of had to braid together. But for a long time, Meg was a little stuck in my plot. And then I realized that what had to happen was that she also had to get pushed out of her home. And so it's obviously like it's like a version of what happened in the historical version of the story, which is people getting shoved out of their homes. But obviously at a much lower volume, she's just losing her apartment. But to her, it feels really real, and it feels really urgent. And she's a single woman. She doesn't have a lot of backup, and it's made clear early on, she's a librarian. She's just kind of barely making it in New York City. And she's constantly like, why does this city hate single women? What? And she has this like the sort of what I think is like a really weirdly common single woman fear of, becoming a bag lady someday. She like sees a bag lady sometimes and is like, is that me in the future? And so everything feels she feels really on the brink. And then she realizes she's losing this rent controlled apartment. And so then to me, that added some urgency. It added some tension. It gave her something she had to do. She's trying to find a new place. It makes her feelings about New York City much more complicated, because she feels this sense like it doesn't want her, like she's not rich, so it doesn't want her. And then it also, right, it constantly gives her a next thing to do. And then, of course, there's the classic storyline of two characters that you wouldn't expect to share a stage sharing a stage. And when Meg and Ellis are kind of bumped together by fate, researching this haunted house together, they at first think that they have, nothing in common. They're very different. They have very different lives. But then it turns out they actually do have a lot in common, and they're able to connect. Really, because they both experienced loss, and they're both looking for more, and they both want more out of life. But I think anytime you like bump together two characters like that, some story happens.
Yeah, it crackles, and I love to hear that the getting pushed out of her apartment came later in the process, because for me, and everybody, if you haven't read this book, it's awesome, and you totally should read it. And it's just brand fresh out, so you can be the first one in your podcast and you can brag.
You're so good at this.
But it feels really organic, the house hunt, and it felt really like an integral part of the story. And so it must have just, when you found it must have just been one of those things where you're like, oh, of course, right?
Exactly. Everything clicks.
Yeah. It's always like, it feels like it's kind of like a spirit.
That's right.
So,
I really think that's true. I feel like that's writing so much of the time, especially when you get really into it and you're really in the flow, and then you just sort of look up and you're like, what happened? Where did that come from? I didn't know that was going to happen. It's like, where does that come from? There's somebody's dictating. or we're crazy.
Well, yeah. I mean, we hear voices. Where do they come from? Don't ask is probably the best answer there.
That's right.
No, but that is, I mean, it's really interesting. Can I ask you a personal question, Amy?
Yes, please do.
Do you personally believe in ghosts?
I keep getting asked this question, and I feel like I keep saying I'm kind of like a Fox Mulder when it comes to ghosts. Like I want to believe. I love the idea of it. And actually, I think scientifically speaking, it makes total sense to me that there would be some other realm or something in between being alive and dead, really. I have not had any personal experience with ghosts. I think maybe it's like I'm too excited about them and like I need to play harder to get, kind of. Like maybe they don't show up if you're like, "Hey, what's up, guys?" They're like, "Oh God, calm down." I think I just need to play it a little more cool because I like ghosts.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I don't know if I want ghosts to be true per se, but we both
Nice ghosts.
we have kids the same age on that kind of like sad edge of make believe fading away. And my 12-year-old is just so angry right now that magic isn't real. And
What? Okay. If it's not real, she's mad.
oh, okay. Sorry, I'm in diversity bubbles. All right, should we?
Spoiler alert.
We're talking about our children. That's a natural segue to the future, shall we?
100%. Yes.
Okay. So here, we're thinking about so when a book ends, if it's a good book, like Amy's book, it stays in your imagination and you find yourself asking narrative questions. So I wanted to think about the imaginative space beyond the last page, what kind of possibilities there could be for these characters. And so that's what we're thinking of this future card as representing. And wow. Okay. So this is like the happily ever after card. It's kind of it's a little heteronormative. We got a husband and a wife and like babies. And they're under a rainbow. I think something that's interesting about this card that isn't really obvious from just looking at it is that it's not just about happiness for an individual. It's also about happiness for a community, a city, or a space. So we can think about like, where does New York go? But I don't think this is literally Meg's future, because she's kind of against enforced being a breeder. And she's a marriage skeptic. So let me ask, what's Meg's happily ever after? And then since you're an expert in everything, why don't you just tell us what you think New York City's happily ever after is? Because that's a tall order.
Great questions. I think, the ending of this book was so hard to figure out because endings are hard. You want them to feel surprising yet inevitable. And a big theme in the book is Meg trying to figure out, and especially talking to her mother and trying to figure out what's the best way to have a life? What's the way to have a meaningful life? What's the way to, live your best life, essentially. And she wants to find her own way. And she doesn't just want to do the happily ever after that everyone is giving her. And so I feel like, without giving too much away about the end, I love the idea of an ending for her where she is able to open up a little bit. She's pretty, as you mentioned, she's a little closed off at the beginning, where she's able to open up and really feel things and connect to people, but still maintain her independence and live in the city in a way that allows her to be independent, but also be connected to people. And at the end of the book, with the haunted house story, it's like really important that everyone has their own space and tells their own story, which I think is true of New York City too. Everyone is to have their own space and be able to tell their own story and not have, one sort of overarching version of history be the only thing that we listen to. And this is a really interesting time to think about the the future of New York City, because since the pandemic started, I feel like the city has changed so much, and I feel like it won't recover quickly. And I don't know. I keep joking with friends in a sort of gallows humor way that it's like, so many people have emptied out, so many businesses have closed, the economy is so depressed. New York City feels really different right now. And, like I have a friend who will say like, oh, it's townhouse time, meaning it's about to get so grim that like artists will be able to buy townhouses again. Is that true? I don't know. But I do think like things are about to really shift in New York City, and the future that I hope is ahead of us is a more diverse and welcoming place where not just very super rich people can live, but where, artists can live, people who are from here can live. We can have diverse communities. We can communicate. We can listen to each other. And our COVID numbers can stop going up. That would be great.
Yeah.
I have no transition or segue, but perhaps now I could do a tarot reading of your book,
Ooh, that sounds good.
The Likely World. Wait, there we go.
Great. I have a copy too.
Oh my God.
Coincidence?
What a coincidence. So eerie. Oh my God. I love this book, and it's amazing to me that it's a debut novel because it's so accomplished and assured. And it's a really interesting world that you create. It feels very much like the world we live in, except there's this invented drug called Cloud, right? Cloud. That has it's very addictive and has the unfortunate side effect of sort of erasing somebody's memory, their short-term memory, right? Okay, and there's this very fascinating main character named Melly. And I'm just going to think about her as I shuffle these tarot cards. Melly's like my favorite kind of character, and a kind of character that's kind of hard to find, I feel like, and that she's complicated. She's a complicated female character. Okay. So I'm not quite as good. What?
I'm a little nervous.
You need to be. No, I'm not as good at reading tarot cards as Melanie, so I have a little cheat sheet here. Okay. So this first card, so this is the past, and it's the 10 of Swords reversed. What? Ouch.
That doesn't look good.
Doesn't look good. Listen, it represents an old situation that ended badly. You are still, or, the person is still carrying around wounds from it, but have buried them so deeply that you do not realize they are still present. The 10 of Swords reversed can appear as a welcome sign that the pain and sadness you have been feeling is ending. And the swords, when it's upside down, the swords look to be falling out, releasing this person of the pain and hurt they've been suffering. And you're releasing memories of the past and allowing the opportunity to move forward. So do you feel like that relates to Melly and her relationship with her past? It's so interesting, her relationship with her past, because we get access to it. We get these chapters, these flashback chapters of her childhood, and then also like teenage and college years, right, in New York City. But she doesn't necessarily have access to those memories. So there's a really interesting like playing with past in this book. So can you talk more about that, ma'am?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I think about Cloud as kind of the opposite of therapy, not doing therapy, but like the opposite. So therapy, sort of as it's traditionally practiced, is talk therapy. One goes and sort of revisits the past and talks about it, and that's supposed to be healing, right? Mm-hmm. But it's always, I've always felt like that's weird in relation to the writer's craft, because regardless of what kind of genre you write, you're mining your memory, right? So you're always kind of digging back there. And even if you're not writing anything autobiographical, it's like, you're like, it's a rainy day. Let me think about a time when it was rainy so I can get some visceral elements in there. And David Shields calls it smuggling as much of reality into your writing, although he's talking about nonfiction. So Cloud erases your memory and takes that thing away. And so there's no possibility for either healing or using it for something productive. So it erases the memory, but the way that I write the drug, it doesn't erase the pain. So that somehow, unconnected to a narrative memory, you're just sort of carrying that loss or that suffering. And so, of course, you can't heal. But we meet Melly when she's 29 days sober from the drug.
Right.
And this is like, anyone's ever tried to quit anything, even like caffeine, you know that in the first couple of weeks of quitting it, everything just sucks. And you're super vulnerable. And you're like, oh no, I lost an earring. And then you're like sob for 2 hours. So she's at this point of possibility, but she's a total mess. So I think that's a good card. That's a good card for where she is. Hits it on the head.
Oh, good. Shall we move on to the present?
Sure. That sounds perfect.
Love the present.
We should have a morning talk show, except like a goth morning talk show.
Yes. Why are all the morning talk shows so cheery?
So peppy.
Not everyone feels that way in the morning.
Yeah. We should be like pissed and pre-caffeine. That should be it. Yeah.
You're like, listen, you don't have to be happy, and we don't have to talk about the weather or anything good. Let's talk about the devil. Good morning, America. Card, it's the devil. You know how in tarot, like some of the cards seem bad, but they're really okay. Like death sometimes actually just means it's like the devil's like bad. It's actually bad. The devil. No, you're fine. You're great.
In my late goth phase, I was doing a lot of tarot readings of myself, which you're not even supposed to do. And then there was like a 2-week period where I just kept pulling the devil, and I was like, I think I'm gonna stop now. I think I'm done. So you're in my late teenage goth phase. Yeah.
How perfect. So the devil card represents your shadow or darker side and the negative forces that constrain you and hold you back from being the best version of yourself. You may be at the effect of that doesn't make any sense, of negative habits, dependencies, behaviors, thought patterns, relationships, and addictions. You find yourself trapped between the short-term pleasure you receive and the long-term pain you experience, which I feel like that really relates to Melly, especially as she's trying to stay off the drug and take care of her child. The stakes are so high, but it's so tempting to go back to it. But there's also in the devil card a duality. Let's see. You are choosing the path of instant gratification at the expense of your long-term well-being. You've been tricked into thinking you have no control over your shadow self or the negative forces and that you can't break free. This made me think a lot of, so in the beginning of this book, sort of the thing that like sets into motion the plot of this book is that this mysterious man shows up in a car and Melly sees him and she can't place him. She doesn't know who he is, but she has a feeling like he's someone who's really important to her life. And that if she can figure out who he is, he's going to like unlock this key to her past. So is he the devil? Is he her shadow self? Can you talk more about how that relates?
That's super great. No one, I think, has asked me about the relationship between Melly and Paul as figures. I've thought of them as like the sort of the male and female version of each other, right? They're twinned in their addictions,
Yeah.
and in some ways their paths are different because Paul is drawn into a male beauty model where he has to be like strong and buff and impenetrable and to like embrace violence. And Mellie's drawn into this more kind of marriage fantasy, caretaking thing. So their paths diverge in part because they're the male and female twin. But addiction is so insidious because in when you're an addict, inside your head, the logic makes perfect sense, right? I mean, you think like, let's just go with coffee because that's universal. Not all of you have been on heroin. I haven't either, by the way. But like,
I'm going for coffee though.
But let's just say coffee, right? When you wake up in the morning, you go for the coffee and you feel like, oh, this is the thing that I need to do to have a good day. But if you know anything about the chemistry of caffeine, what you know is that, in fact, it's the thing that you need to do to stave off caffeine withdrawal. That's the thing driving you out of bed. And you can map your chemistry. Like your dopamine is going down, and then you get a little caffeine, and then caffeine takes you to about 2 p.m., and then you start to crash again, and the only way to feel better is caffeine, right? So you're stuck in this little cycle that feels like it's my routine, it's self-care, this is what I choose to do, but you're really being driven by this very, very tiny narrative, right? Of like, I'm not calling you guys all junkies for loving caffeine, but like, it's like, I gotta score my junk, and I gotta figure out how to score my junk, and I gotta stay high. So you're kind of set, and nothing else can really matter inside of that. And when you leave it, when you abandon caffeine, because that's all we're talking about here, when you abandon caffeine, you feel like in your brain, you will hear the thoughts of like, you'll hear yourself justifying all kinds of reasons why it makes perfect sense to pour yourself another cup of coffee. That like, oh no, I mean, that was 2 days ago, I decided to quit. And now I'm good. I can have another cup. So it does, it feels logical in your head, but in fact, you're stuck in this tiny little narrative inside which you can't grow. So stop drinking coffee, guys, and then you guys will achieve mental nirvana.
That's what this whole book is really about.
Yes.
Well, I was paid by the decaf tea lobbies to write this whole book.
I think we're off goth brand, Amy. Quit caffeine. I can be we can be a straight edge.
That's right. Can I ask a follow-up question of what made you want to write about addiction other than your hatred of my morning cup of coffee because you're so judgy of me?
No, I'm so hostile to your coffee. I'm a coffee addict myself. It's not something I chose. It is not one of those things where I sat down and I said, like, my character is going to be an addict. She was a mom, and I was a single mom, and my daughter had food protein intolerance, which is something that's very, very common now. But when she was born, it was quite rare, and so it took a long time to locate what was wrong with her. And between when she was 12 months and 18 months, she lost 4 pounds, which is a lot. Yeah, it was super scary and traumatizing, and I was alone. So I think I was kind of writing from there, but in fictionalizing it, that kind of desperation and that loneliness, I ended up with the addiction arc, and and that also makes me think about the question you asked before, which is like the relationship between her lost love and her addiction, which is, when we break up, we're losing a lot of brain chemistry, and we can feel we can be like addicts, and find ourselves going back again and again to someone we know isn't good for us.
Not to drink coffee instead.
Totally rational, which is a great thing about me. I only ever fall in love with people who are perfect for me. So
Wow, that's really convenient.
yes, it is.
Nice job.
I'm very evolved.
You can offer some tips and tricks about that on our morning talk show.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, it's gonna be great. Okay, so now for the future, I have chosen the tower.
Ooh, that's a
What? Wait. Okay, there we go. The tower. So dramatic. And it has like a hat that's falling off of it. It's so cute. Okay. When the tower card appears, expect the unexpected, massive change, upheaval, destruction, chaos. There's no escaping it. Change is here to tear things up, create chaos, and destroy everything in its path. Without giving too much away, Mellie works really hard throughout the book to protect herself and her child and to free herself from addiction and learn the truth about herself. And it's interesting that you say that a lot of it came out of that sort of core experience of being a mother of and being worried about, being a mother of any young baby is so scary. Even if the baby's completely healthy, you're just like, it's a very tiny thing and I have to keep it alive. Oh my God. So, and Mellie's struggle, her daughter's quite young, and her struggles to sort of figure herself out, figure her life out, and take good care of her toddler, her baby, like when she can barely take care of herself, is really animates the book and like ratchets the tension up. You're always so worried about Junie, the baby. So what do you see as the future for Mellie?
It's so fun that you asked that question, because just like you, I wrote a lot of endings for this book. So I spent a lot of different, like, where does she end up? And some of my readers, I'm not gonna, felt like I should go dark at the end, that it needed to end tragically. I just resisted that. And I would say I end up somewhere in the middle, like all is not rosy and perfect. But maybe the very worst things that might have happened don't happen. But I thought, like, I had things where, like, she went off with, where it was a romantic ending, and she like went off into the sunset and also had a job that was new and sexy, and like, and then it was kind of like I made too much happen. And also, like, the book just doesn't take her that far. She's still got so much work to do, but I hope that that there's room for a reader to imagine a pretty good future for her, without feeling like it's necessarily assured. Did I spoil my book?
No, I don't think so. Read it, you guys. It's really good. I wonder if I could also ask, what's in the future for you? Are you working on another book? I know that's such an annoying question. Are you, what's next?
Well, yes, I'm working on another book. I can't say it's going swimmingly. And this stuff, having a book is really distracting from writing.
Oh yeah. And like the world, are you finding the world to be like a little bit distracting right now?
Yeah. And having kids at home is also like super conducive to the writing process.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm writing a book that is set next summer. It's kind of bananas, obviously, because we're in the most uncertain time and nobody knows what's going to happen. But that's kind of the frame I'm using to build the imaginative world. And I've got some wiggle room so that if, like, I don't have to predict what happens next summer to write it, but I'm having fun sort of making a world that launches next June.
Wow. Wait, so is it like in like pandemic world? Is the fictional world you're writing in?
What I've done is I've created some areas of vagueness, and some so that it's not necessarily our reality, but or even something as clear as an alternate reality. But it's more of an imaginative frame for writing it. Like, I start next June. School year's done. We've had a pandemic.
Yeah.
an election.
It goes awesome, right?
I have found a way to avoid saying which one it was. So
I mean, we already know you can read the future. You can ask your tarot cards.
right.
And
Do not, you don't read that future, Amy, because you're going to pull like the devil, the tower. And what was the other one?
I'll be like, why are there 5 devils in this deck? Like, how did that even happen? How possible?
That's not good. That's not good. We need me to do the reading because it's going to be like cups and rainbows and yeah. Here's my prediction of, but yeah, this is the rainbow represents gayness. This is the outcome of the election. Yeah.
Love it.
Okay.
Happy, inclusive future for everyone.
Yeah. So we're nearing the end of our time. If anybody has like a burning question they want to drop into the chat, we can maybe answer 1 or 2. Well, maybe 1. We can answer 1. Yeah.
Maybe the best one, our favorite one.
Yeah.
While they're thinking, I just want to say this has been so much fun, and I'll go ahead and admit that the tarot card reading was entirely Melanie's idea, and it's the best. And I think every reading should be this way forever.
That's totally cool. Well, I'll admit, I bet you guys didn't guess this at all. I stacked the deck.
Don't see that. You're going to anger the spirits.
I know. Oh, we said we were going to summon a spirit by Zoom. We didn't say we would. We said we'd answer the question of whether you could. So what do you think? You're not super a believer, but do you think if a medium could summon a spirit, they would be able to do it over Zoom? Or do you think that the technology is impenetrable by the spiritual world?
No, I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say definitely, because you know how have you ever seen one of those pictures where it's like a representation of what Wi-Fi looks like? It's like you could see the Wi-Fi. What are they? Rays? I don't know. In the air, and then it's like a huge, array of all of these different lines, and it's like going in between dimensions. This is how Wi-Fi works, you guys. It goes in between dimensions. It enters alternate realities and then goes back into our reality. I'm pretty sure that's right. And so I think that other invisible things that float throughout the air could 100% jump onto Wi-Fi and get in Zoom. I think that just is like
a no-brainer.
That's a no-brainer, just IT issue. Yes, of course.
Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but my Mac is already haunted. So I don't have any questions at all.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
I think this is I think we should wrap it up. Guys, thank you so much for coming. It was totally awesome to have you here.
Thank you so much for watching our Goth Morning talk show that we're starting next summer with Melanie's book.
Perfect. That was the question that all of the Red Hen staff have. We all want to know what podcast you're going to be on.
Okay. Well, now you know.
All right.
Yeah,
perfect.
I would watch the heck out of that. So
Amazing. We have 2 viewers already.
Yeah, and you both have the fancy podcast microphones already. You're ready to go.
That's right. Wait, it does itself. We're all ready.
Very cool. Very cool.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah, thank you both so much. This was amazing. Loved it.
So much fun. Thank you guys so much.
Can't wait to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us for another week of Hen House at Home. Next week, I believe, Monica, is next week our final week?
No. Next week we have our short stories and novella.
Right.
Yeah, so we have Laura Ehrlich, the author of Animal Life, Tracy Dougherty, the author of High Skies, and Rima, published today, and Rima Rajbanshi, the author of Sugar Smoke Song. So join us same time next week, 4 p.m. Pacific time, right here on the Red Hen Press YouTube and Facebook and wherever you're watching. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Amy and Melanie, it was an amazing event. I had so much fun. And the staff, we were all just gushing about how fun this was to watch. So
Yeah, we
thank
love
you
that.
guys so much. And thank you all for coming and watching. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you all very much. Feel free to check out the books at redhen.org/virtual. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.